In this video, I'm going to show you how to export an SVG file for cutting with your digital craft cutter or for doing print and cut with your digital craft cutter. It doesn't matter which machine you have. You might have a Boss Cut Gazelle, a Wishblade, a Silhouette. At this point of the process, which machine you have isn't important. What is important is being able to export the file from CraftArtist 2 in a format that your cutter software can recognize and use. First of all, it's very important that you be using CraftArtist 2. If you're using Digital Scrapbook Artist version 1 or 2 or CraftArtist version 1, those versions do not have the ability to export SVG files. So it's very important that you're using the CraftArtist version 2. I've already got my CraftArtist 2 open with a blank page on the screen, and I've already loaded the Berry Pie digital kit, as you can see over here on the side. And the process is very easy. Whichever kit you're using, go to your embellishments tab and select design over here in the left column and simply drag it onto the page. When you drag it onto the page, you'll see by the handles around it that it's already selected. At this point, go over to the right side of the page where you see line width here. Click on the drop down arrow and select 0.1 point. Even if when you open your CraftArtist 2 and bring your embellishment onto the page, even if this already says 0.1, it's critical that you click the drop down arrow, go down the list, and click on the 0.1 point. Once you've done that, with your embellishment still selected, go up here to the File menu, go down the list to Export, hover your mouse, and slide over to Export as Picture, and click on that. In the picture export window, there are numerous options. Now, in this case, we want to export to an SVG. So right here under Properties Format, if yours does not already say Scalable Vector Graphic, it might say, it might be pink selected, it might be JPEG selected. If it doesn't say Scalable Vector Graphic right here, click the drop down arrow and change it to Scalable Vector Graphic SVG. Now, in SVG, the DPI isn't real important. I'm getting the best results with the 96 DPI. If yours doesn't say 96, click on the drop down arrow, go down the list, and click on 96. There are several options down in this area of the window, and you'll notice that none of them are selected. If any of these are selected in your window, click on it to deselect it. You want all of these boxes blank. Once you have all of those settings adjusted, oh, I'm sorry, one more thing. In this box that says selected item, it might say page when you open this window. If it does say page, click on the drop down arrow and change it to selected item. When everything is set up over here, come down to the export button and click on it one time. And this will open up a window where you can choose the location and a file name. Use this little drop down arrow and just browse anywhere on your computer to the file where you would like to save your SVG file. I've already created a folder on my desktop called CA2 to SVG. Oops. Double click. Once you have this box directed to the folder where you want to save the file, come down to the file name and the default will say Craft Project 1. You can simply highlight that and change it to any name you want. You can give it a descriptive name like blue flower or decorative embellishment. It doesn't matter what the name is, but use a name that means something to you so that you can find it later. For this video and demonstration, I'm just going to give my files number names. So I've named it 1 and I click on Save. Now over here you can see I have a window open to that folder already. And right here I see a preview of the file I've just exported, and you can see in the name right here it's an SVG file. If your browser does not show you a thumbnail of the design that you've just exported, don't be worried. Your icon it may be a Windows Explorer icon, it may be a generic icon, it may be an Inkscape icon. That's not important. Mine shows as a thumbnail because I have specifically installed an SVG thumbnail viewer on my computer. If you don't have that SVG thumbnail viewer, it's okay. It won't affect anything. So back over here in Craft Artist, I've already exported this design and I want to export some other designs. So I'm just going to delete that from my page and select a different design by dragging it onto my workspace. Now notice here that I changed the line width on the last design to 0.1 and this box still says 0.1, but I'm still going to click the drop down arrow and select 0.1 from the list. And again, I'll go to File, Export, Export it Picture. Craft Artist remembers my settings from the last time. They're all the same, so I don't have to change anything. And I just click on Export. Give my file a name. It's already in the folder I was in last time. It remembers the last folder that was used. And click on Save. Again, I'm going to delete this embellishment and go to the next one. Same process, click on the drop down arrow, select 0.1 from the list, go to File, Export, Export as Picture. Craft Artist remembers all of my previous settings. I click on Export. It's still in the same directory, so I just change the name and click on Save. And over here in my folder on the side, I can see that all 3 of those files have been put in this same folder. Now I'm going to do one more additional step and I'll show you why later in the video. This step is for another process, but what I'm going to do is drag that first embellishment onto the screen, click on File, Export as Picture, but this time instead of exporting it as a scalable vector graphic, I'm going to change this to JPEG. I'll show you why later in the video, and click on Export. Again, give my file a name, but this time my file is a JPEG, not an SVG. As you see over here, the SVG of this blue flower I did earlier, I named 1, so I'm also going to name my JPEG 1. And it's a different file format. JPEG is still selected. I click on Save. And now you can see up here I have 1.svg and down here I have 1.jpg. The difference is that this SVG file has a cutting line. The JPEG does not have a cutting line, and I'll show you more about that later in the video. I'm done in Craft Artist now, so I want to show you how these files are going to import in some of the various programs. The first program I'll show you is Inkscape. I'm going to select an SVG file from my folder and drag it onto the page. I'm going to right click the file and select Ungroup. Click away from the design to deselect, and now click directly on my design, click and drag my mouse to drag the image away, and right here you can see is the cut line. This is the vector cut line that can be used for the digital cutters. If you happen to be using one of the machines that you cut directly from Inkscape, you will need to edit the nodes in this cut line to simplify the path, and depending on your machine, you may have to adjust the stroke width or the stroke color. Once you've done that, simply realign the cut lines and the image, and you'll be ready to go. Now I'm going to drag a selection to select both pieces and drag it off of the screen. And I want to show you that if I now select a different SVG and drag it onto the page, ungroup, deselect, select the front image and drag it away, and here's the cut line beneath it. The reason I'm showing you this is so that you can see that Inkscape did in fact bring in two different files with two different cut lines and two different graphics. I'm showing you this so that you can see these files are exported correctly. The correct image is with the correct cut lines. And you'll see more about this later in the video why I'm pointing that out. I'm done showing you Inkscape. Next I'll show you the newest version of Sure Cuts a Lot. Now this is very important. In your version of Sure Cuts a Lot, click on the Help menu and select About Sure Cuts a Lot. Here you will see your version number. The most recent version is 3.032. You must have version 3.032 for these SVGs to import correctly with the graphic. If you're using a newer version than 3.032, go to the the Craft Edge website and download the latest release 3.032. So I have my Sure Cuts a Lot 3, the latest version, open, and again I'm going to select an SVG file, drag it onto the cutting mat, right click and select Ungroup. Over here in the Layers tab, you can see that there are two different layers. If I hide the graphic, you can see here is the cut line. If I hide the cut line, the graphic is still there. With both layers viewable, I have the graphic layer selected, and if I drag it away, oh, I'm sorry, that's not the graphic layer, that is the cutting line layer. But anyways, you can see that I have both a graphic and a cut line. I'm not real good with this program, so bear with me. There we go. Just like in Inkscape, if you're going to be cutting this file, you'll want to simplify the path as there are just way too many nodes. I'm not familiar enough with this program to show you how to do it, but I'm sure that Brandon and some of the other folks over on the Scal group have plenty of tutorials and videos to show you how to simplify this path. Now I'm going to delete these pieces, I think. Let's drag it to the trash can. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I'm doing something wrong and it's not working. I'll just drag it out of the way. Now I want you to see that if I select a different SVG and drag it onto the cutting mat, it imports with the correct graphical image and the correct cutting lines. If I ungroup this, select and drag, you can see I have this rounded flower image and the rounded flower cut line. Like I said before, you'll need to use your editing tools in Scal and simplify this path. As is, it just has way too many cutting nodes in it. That's it for Sure Cuts a Lot. Now I'm going to show you Silhouette Studio. Silhouette Studio, you'll need to have the designer edition. The free version of Silhouette Studio does not have the ability to use SVG files. If you're using the free version, you need to update to designer edition. Now, just like before, I can select a one of my SVG designs and drag it onto the software, and here it appears. If you're not familiar with drag and drop, you might be more familiar with going to File. Where is it? Import. Oh, there it is. I'm sorry. Import to my library. When the import window opens, change the file type to SVG, and then just use the browse buttons and browse to the file that you want to open and click on OK. I'm using drag and drop. It's what I'm used to. Now, once you have this design on your Silhouette Studio page, select it, right click, and choose Ungroup. Deselect, reselect, drag to the side, and you can see that I have a graphic and cut lines. In Silhouette Studio, before this file is ready to cut, you'll have to adjust the cut settings for the cut lines. You can do that by selecting the cut line and going to the Cut Style tab, which will open your cut style window, and as you can see, no cut is selected. Click on Cut Edge, and now these cut lines are ready to cut. When the graphic is selected, if you go to the cut settings, no cut is selected, and you want to leave it that way. If you select Cut Edge, what's going to cut is a rectangle around the image, and that's not what we want. What we want is the contour of the flower. So leave this part of the design at no cut, and the cut lines are set to cut edge. Now there seems to be an error in Silhouette Studio with importing these images. As you saw, I had just brought in the blue flower, and my Silhouette Studio is still open. If I try to bring in another SVG right now, bring it down here on the page. Okay. As you can see, it brought in the cut line of the rounded flower that I selected, but it brought in the graphic from the last image that I had selected. That's an error in the Silhouette Studio software, and I'm sure the Silhouette Studio people will do what they can to resolve the issue. I'll bring in another one to show you the same thing happens. If I ungroup this, now as you can see, it brought in the same graphic, kind of distorted, from the first SVG file that I had imported, but it did bring in the correct cut line. I'll give that a cut style so you can see it better. Now obviously this cut line isn't going to work with this graphic, and again this is an error in the Silhouette Studio software. I do have a workaround for this error. I'll do that in another video. Meanwhile, I'll just tell you that if you import your first SVG, save it, close out completely from Silhouette Studio, then reopen Silhouette Studio, you can import the next SVG file and it will come in with the correct graphic. That's enough of Silhouette Studio. Now I'm going to show you how these SVGs come into the Funtime software. There are several versions of FunTime. I'm using FunTime for the Boss Cut Gazelle. If you're using the FunTime 2010, everything will work the same way, but you'll just cut to different cutters. With my FunTime open, I select an SVG and I drag it onto my page. And as you see, it brought in a cut line, but it did not bring in the graphic. This is something, it's not an error, it's not a problem, it's just the way the SVG importer is in FunTime. It's the same way in many other cutting programs. They bring in the SVG part of the file, which is the vectors, but they don't bring in the graphic from the file. But there's a little workaround for that. Remember earlier when I was doing the export from Craft Artist, I also exported this design as a JPEG. So what I can do now is bring my JPEG onto the screen, and it is the graphic, and I'm going to send it to the back so that my cut lines are at the front.